Uh, I'm Alex Kamkar. Thank you guys for coming to our Houston Hurricane Harvey Zoom meeting. Believe it or not, it seems like not that long ago Harvey was with us, but we're almost 1,000 days later, believe it or not, to the day today. So I thought it would be a really, really opportune time to kind of diagnose what happened, where we are today, um, and figure out kind of what we're doing going forward. We got a great panel of folks here. I'd like to introduce them, and then we'll kind of let me get out of the way and let them talk. Our first panelist is Scott Davis, the President Location Strategy. Scott, why don't you put your hand up just so everybody knows. Scott is a president of a firm dedicated to real estate strategy and consulting. Prior to starting Location Strategy, he was a senior vice president for Myers Research and responsible for their single family advisory work. I know Scott best, being the regional director of Metro Study. Fantastic job there. In his 20-year real estate career, he sold more than 2,900 acres for residential as well as commercial development. He's been recognized as a top producer in the Houston and Eastern region of CBRE, as well as received the prestigious Land Deal of the Year award from the Houston Business Journal, and was nominated for the Global Business Director of NII Global for his leadership in commercial real estate. Scott is also an author, having written 2 books on the millennial generation and changing the workplace and faith communities. So thank you, Scott, for being with us. Really appreciate you.
Welcome. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. Augie's next. Augie Campbell is currently going through a lot of transition. He is going to be the executive director of the Association of Water Board Directors on June 1st. He's a great guy. I know him best as the president and CEO of the West Houston Association. Starting in November of 15, the West Houston Association focuses on water resources, flood control, parks, recs, sustainable infrastructure, as well as development planning and education for a 1,000-mile area of West Harris County, as well as eastern Fort Bend. Augie is also the co-founder of Houston Stronger, which has successfully advocated for billions of dollars in resilience funding from the federal, state, and local levels. He also serves as the chair of the Harris Plus Flood Solutions group. It's a 501c4, which manages Houston Stronger. Prior to running the West Houston Association, Augie served in public life as the assistant city attorney for the city of Houston, as well as was in the Army Reserves, including a tour in Iraq. He's also a member of the State Bar and is a member of the Texas Water Conservation Association. So thank you, Augie, for being with us.
Alex?
Cool. And last but certainly not least is Lee Leonard. Lee is the president and CEO of BGE. He sets the direction. He's responsible for leading strategic initiatives and promoting culture of empowerment, encouraging employees to make a difference in their communities. Lee has over 30 years of engineering experience covering the full range of projects development from master planning through construction management. He's designed roadways, drainage, and flood control facilities, water distribution systems, international wastewater design build projects, wastewater design and planning project infrastructure, and he has specialized expertise in hydraulics and hydrology in the greater Houston area. Let me take a breath here. As a licensed professional engineer, Lee is a recognized expert in flood control issues. He contributes to the technical expertise to Harris County, the city of Houston, and Fort Bend County, serving on numerous task force and advisory committees on a wide range of issues regarding flood control policy, regulation, criteria, and procedures. Lee is also active in the engineering community writ large. He currently serves as the president-elect of the American Council of Engineering Companies for the state of Texas. He served as the chair of the Public Policy Council for ACEC Texas, serves as the president of the Engineering and Scientific Society, president of ACEC Houston, and president of the Society of the American Military Engineers Houston Galveston Post. As chairman of the West Houston Association Flood Control, Drainage, and Wetlands Committee from 14 to 19, Lee has led the creation of Houston Stronger, a campaign to advocate for $2.5 billion with a B dollars bond election in Harris County in the aftermath of Harvey that was overwhelmingly approved in August of 18 by an 85-15 margin. He served on Mayor Sylvester Turner's transition committee for Rebuild Houston and as a task force member for the creation of Build Houston Forward, $13.5 billion 25-year program to restore City of Houston's drainage and paving infrastructure. In addition, and this is really where it gets interesting, Lee has a lot of credits publication-wise. Mr. Winnar served on the technical advisory committee for the city of Houston, developing the technical paper number 101, TP 101, is the guidelines for the consideration of overland flow for the extreme event for improved projects in the city of Houston, Harris County. Mr. Winnar wrote the guidelines for Harris County overland flow methodology referenced in the county infrastructure regulations. And Lee also serves on the technical advisory committee for the Harris County flood control districts and the development of their hydrology and hydraulics guidance manual. That's a really long-winded way of saying the guy wrote some of the stuff that we use today to help keep people safe, and that's a big deal. So thank you, Lee, for being with us today.
Thank you, Alex.
Absolutely. So I kind of want to do a high-level overview of kind of where we are. Hurricane Harvey happened about 1,000 days ago. That storm started out in the Atlantic, moved over the Caribbean, across the Yucatan Peninsula, and then on August 24th, on Thursday, August 24th, there was a Category 1 storm as it entered the Gulf. It worked its way up the Gulf Coast, and on Friday, August 25th at 6 p.m., strengthened to a Category 4 storm, making initial landfall in Texas at Rockport. For 2 days, the Texas Gulf Coast and Greater Houston was pounded with water, and here we are now, 1,000 days later, literally trying to deal with that. I think we've made a lot of progress in a lot of areas, but before we get there, I just kind of want to give a kind of human impact to this and ask a couple of our panelists a little bit of bio questions. Each panelist is going to get 2 questions. The first is, in 2017, where were you working, and where were you and your family at the time of the storm? The second question is going to be, how many major storms have you dealt with or survived since you got to Houston? And then the mystery question, which will go to Augie first, is when was that we need a bigger boat moment, Augie? So when did you realize that this was the big deal that we've been talking about and worried about? And I'll give you the floor.
Thanks, Alex. And that's not necessarily a surprise question in the sense. I think we all were sitting there and the water was coming up slowly. So, it was literally this kind of was making its way to my doorstep. And that kind of concentrates your mind, especially when you feel like all you can do is get on social media and send out some tweets or some emails. And, that doesn't really seem to fix your problem. So I got a bunch of emails back. And I got some emails that I didn't expect, including yours, Alex. We had a lot of chatter on the West Houston Association Flood Control Committee talking about, this is what we've been talking about. We had been through flooding before. I actually, to kind of answer your previous question a little bit, I started at the city of Houston in the legal department right before Hurricane Ike. And so my first big assignment was writing memorandums of understanding with other municipalities to get emergency aid in. And so that was sort of formulative in the way that I thought about emergency assistance in our region. And I also helped on Rebuild Houston, now Build Houston Forward in the legal department there. So, a lot of these issues were tricky. We actually took the step of getting our water rate structure and taking drainage out of it, because before I came to the city of Houston, your water rates included drainage. And so we've known for a long time that we had an issue. We forgot because we had a drought or we had potholes or we had all these other problems. And, I think like we're saying now, we're always fighting the last disaster. And so it makes it hard to achieve all of these things. So,
absolutely. So
right in the middle of Harvey, I was basically emailing and I think Lee Leonard said, we've been working on this over the past year in the Water Resources Committee. And we talked to Joby Allen and Joby Allen said, Lee, I need you to make a plan. So how many $1 billion are we going to need, Lee?
Oh, and we got them. We got them. Scott, I want to quickly ask, where were you living at the time? How many storms have you been through as a lifelong Houstonian? And how long did your mystery question is, how long did your hurricane kit last that we talk about?
Sure. So where I was, so the day that it was supposed to hit, I was in Dallas. and I caught a flight to Southwest Airlines back to Houston, and it was connecting from Houston to Corpus, and it was the last flight to Corpus. Probably one of the more tense environments I've ever been in my entire life, with everybody on that plane, not knowing what they were flying into. But I made it back in time before it hit. So I have a house, I still do. It's a different house now, but over near the medical center, where we took on about 3 feet of water in the storm. So that was certainly, we'd flooded before in Allison. So it wasn't a new experience, but to see that much water and that much devastation was just unbelievable. I mean, even for having been here as long as I have, the first storm growing up, I remember, was Claudette in '79, and then Alicia, and kind of all the same ones that everybody has seen. So if you've been around Houston, my wife likes to say every longtime Houstonian is an amateur meteorologist, that you watch what's going to happen with these things. So, and I'm sorry, what was your mystery question, Alex?
How long did your hurricane kit last? You and I joke about that.
Sure. So one of my favorite quotes is from Ralph Waldo Emerson. It says, we learn geology the morning after the earthquake. And so, having been through so many storms, we got a pretty extensive box. We made it, I would say, probably about 10 days with that stuff. It was a little different here in this storm. Ike was really the more challenging one for the box, because we were out of power for 12 days. But at least here the stores were open and so on. But yeah, everybody should have a hurricane box. In fact, as soon as I heard stuff about the coronavirus in China, I went and refreshed our box. I'm like, we're going to need it for the virus, or we're going to need it for hurricane season. So
absolutely.
And just for everyone on the call, I see some familiar names. I'm sure y'all know, but we do have that starting up next month. So there's no time like the present to get ready. Absolutely. My mystery item in the box is that French press coffee, because if there's no power, your coffee maker is not going to work.
Yeah, you need the jet fuel.
Absolutely.
Lee, your questions: where were you in August 2017? How many major storms have you been through? And I know you have a lot of technical expertise. Were you in quiet contemplation, or was your phone going off the hook? That's your mystery question.
All right. Well, I was out in Katy off of Fry Road, where we live. And of course, as a hydrologist, I know that I live inside the Barker Reservoir. We were fortunate to evacuate on that Monday to San Antonio and spent a couple weeks with my wife and 6 boys and 2 dogs in a hotel in San Antonio. And my impression of this right from the get-go, it rains one day, a foot of rain. It rains another day, a foot. Okay. Let's get some relief on that third day. And that third day, just the sound of 12 inches of rain falling is loud, isn't it? And so that third day was really rough. And we barely got out. A lot of our neighbors flooded. The water, thankfully, did not come in our home, although the constable came by and asked us to evacuate, that they were expecting us to have 2 to 4 feet of water in our house. A lot of our neighbors were not, as you know, as all on this call know, were not nearly as fortunate. But what resonated in my mind as a civil engineer and someone who is called to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public, that we have failed in our calling, as Harvey attests. And it's just completely unacceptable what we experienced as a community. And so how do we go about making substantive change? We didn't get into this predicament overnight. We won't get out of it overnight, but we've got to change and advocate for a better, stronger, more resilient Houston, Harris County, and surrounding region. So yeah, I think the ringing really was with West Houston and with Augie, with the West Houston Committee, with the work around, hey, this is exactly what we've been working on. This is exactly what flood control has been working on for a long time. So anything that's in our plan is borrowed from public sources. And of course, flood control, City of Houston, and the surrounding counties have their plans. And so Houston Stronger was a way to bring these plans together, hopefully in a format and in a way that the public could see them that we could build a coalition of like-minded folks in the community that would say, like we have said, this is unacceptable. We need to do something better.
You got it. Absolutely. Well, I think that's a great point. I think a lot of folks are going to be dealing with this. I know at least for the rest of my career, this is going to be a major item. Great. Go ahead.
Great. Well, thanks again, Alex. So this is a shot actually of Brace Bayou. Sorry, no, this is Buffalo Bayou, looking towards downtown. But again, you see that's just the scope of the extent of flooding we saw in these areas. That was really, although we've had big storms before and large floods, really unprecedented. You go to the next slide, Alex. This is a little more personal shot to me. I was standing on my neighbor's porch, and that's my house. The morning, I think that was Sunday morning. We had about 3 to 3.5 feet of water in the house, and kind of you asked Augie kind of when was the moment that he knew he needed a bigger boat. I would say this was my bigger boat moment. As I was standing there, my neighbor's house was new, and so it was elevated 4 feet above the floodplain. And as we saw the water kind of lapping up on that last set of steps, listening to the weather forecast that we may get another 15 to 20 inches of rain, which thankfully did not come, we had some legitimate concerns about where we were going to go next. Fortunately, that wasn't necessary. Next. So we look at the amount of storm, just kind of a brief look back. This was a graphic that came out at the time. This was the maximum rainfall caused by hurricanes by state through about 2012, I think is what the graph says. But you'll see there in Texas, that was 48 inches. That was Claudette, and that was actually taken just outside of Alvin in actually it was 1979. So again, we're accustomed to large amounts of rainfall, and that was actually the until Harvey, the U.S. 24-hour rainfall record was right there in Alvin. Next slide. So when we got back the results, it was difficult. Oftentimes it's difficult in these storms to get accurate results in terms of rainfall and wind speed. You have a storm will blow the anemometer off the roof of the weather station, so they're estimating. And Harvey, it was overflowing the rain gauges, so they weren't really sure exactly with rain gauge measurements, and some of them they took with radar. But what they found is just in southeast Texas and the orange shaded areas, there were 16 rain measurement locations that exceeded that 1979 record. One of those was in Brazoria County, just about 2 miles west of Friendswood. Got over 50 inches of rain in the storm. There were gauges in Santa Fe and League City. They got 51 to 54 inches. One right there where Clear Creek goes under I-45 between Webster and League City was really the highest spot in the area. But there are also areas in Brazoria County in particular that didn't get much rain. West Columbia only got about 10 inches in the storm. So it was really concentrated in Houston, and then areas to the east. They were pushing 60 plus inches in kind of the Golden Triangle around Beaumont. So it was really more concentrated to the east. But there were areas that got just unbelievable amounts of rain. If you look at Harris County, the amount of rain that all of Harris County got within the storm is equal to the volume of Lake Pontchartrain. If you've driven out to New Orleans and drive over that long causeway, that's how much water fell in the storm just on Harris County. So next slide. When we look at those rainfall amounts, and if you're not in the real estate business or engineering business, I think everybody's probably familiar with the year designations, and Lee's probably forgotten more about this than I can explain. But essentially, a 100-year storm is the kind of storm you'd expect about a 1% chance of happening in a given year, to give you an idea of scale. So when we look at these areas in purple, the amount of rainfall that they received was greater than a 1,000-year storm, or a 0.1% chance of happening every year. So it's really, really low probability that we would expect to see this kind of storm. And then you can see down in the southern and western areas of the Houston area that are in yellow, what the rainfall was much more what they would experience in a common storm. So it really shows you why the flooding was concentrated in the areas that it was in town. Next slide. So we were engaged by Augie's group, the Association of Water Board Directors, to look at the extent of flooding in MUDs in the Houston area. There were over 950 municipal utility districts that we surveyed. I think I ended up driving myself about 400 of those. And then the others, I got data from the MUD annual financial reports. Just pro tip, if you have insomnia, I've got some great recommendations on ways to address that with MUD financial reports. We were able to gather data on the flooding in those districts, and you can see there kind of the shading really along that I-45 corridor was the area that we saw the I-45 beltway right there along Clear Creek, where we saw the most intense rainfall, were the areas that we saw the highest number of flooded houses. There are also some large municipal utility districts in that area too. So we're looking at a raw number, not a percentage. And that's based on damage claims that homeowners made to FEMA. We were talking earlier, nobody likes to look back at the data and get hard counts on what the extent of flooding was in the aftermath of the storm. So really everybody's going off kind of the same data that was collected in the first 4 weeks to 3 months after the storm. Next slide. So I had a couple shots just of areas in the Brazoria County. I know we have a lot of folks in that area that are on the call. Most of the flooding that we saw there was along, again, Clear Creek and in Friendswood area because of the intense rainfall along that channel. This is just, it's kind of around the north of the airport in Lake Jackson. You have the prison farms off to the right. It's pretty extensive flooding in that area from rainfall. And then in some of those neighborhoods immediately west of 288, or sorry, east of 288 and north of FM 2004, having the Richwood area was another area we saw pretty extensive flooding because of overflow from the river and some of the creeks in that area. Next slide. And here's Richwood. This is along FM 2004. So again, some pretty extensive flooding in that area. Beyond that, most of Brazoria County really escaped a lot of the heavy flooding we saw on the west side of Houston. Next slide. But one of the things that came out of our research, back one, Alex, was that there are a couple key dates that we found. So when we looked at areas that had flooded and when were they developed, kind of the first date is 1968. And that was the first year that there was actually a national flood insurance program. Before that, flood insurance was private. They kept having to bail them out every 3 or 4 years because they were underfunded. And so that's when they created flood insurance program. And in areas or houses that were flooded, we looked at not when the house was built, but when that subdivision was created. And the reason we chose that date is that would determine the rules in place for flood control. So 1968, 17% of the houses that flooded were built in areas that were developed before 1960. 1981 was the next date. That was the first floodplain map for Harris County, the first firm map. Most of the other counties got their maps between 81 and 84. So between 68 and 81, about 48% of the houses that were flooded were developed in those areas. So what that means is that 65% of the houses which flooded were in areas that were developed before there was a floodplain map, before you knew where the floodplain was going to be. So really when we look at how to address this issue, it becomes really an old house problem and not a new house problem because the regulations that we have in place today are very protective. We look at post 1981 to 2009, about 32% of the houses that flooded were built in that time period. And that's when we began to see detention requirements and leaking, correct me on this, I think it was the early 90s when those came in most places in Harris County at least. And then 2009, that's when we had the Tropical Storm Allison Recovery Project regulations, the new floodplains that came out for much of the area. Only 3% of the houses which flooded were built in or developed in that time frame. And that's probably about a third, not a third, but a significant number. We're looking at probably 100 to 150,000 houses that flooded or that were built in that time frame. Only about 500 of those flooded. So a very, very small number. Our current regulations work. We're seeing remapping in some of the other locations, which the other gentleman will talk about. But But again, this is when you look at this graph, it's just this is a regional problem. This is not a new development problem because that's not where the flooding is taking place. Next slide. We looked at some of the areas where we did see extensive flooding and kind of numbered them out. Again, this is out of the AWB survey where we went and looked at where houses were located. Number one, there on the west side was a reservoir overflow. I know Lee's going to talk about that. But that was a significant source of flooding on the west side of Houston. Number two, we had Brazos River overflow in Fort Bend County and some degree in Brazoria County, where it overtopped the levees and the way those systems are designed. If you close the outfalls into the levees, and you got, in the case of one subdivision there, got 30 inches plus of rainfall after they were closed, there's not much in the way of engineering that you can do. So again, intense rainfall there. Number three, Spring Creek, Cypress Creek. This is really what people think of traditionally when they think of development caused flooding. This is areas where they were developed in the 1970s, and we just didn't have the standards in place that we have today. It really speaks to the need for a regional solution to address the flooding in those areas. Number four, we had overflow on San Jacinto River that hit areas west or east of Conroe and in the Kingwood area. At one point, the flow over the San Jacinto River Dam at Lake Houston was greater than Niagara Falls, almost twice the rate of flow of Niagara Falls, to get an idea of the amount of water flow going through that area. And then finally, number five, that was there in the Clear Creek area. We got over 50 inches of rain. Before Harvey, we thought the maximum amount of rainfall the Houston area atmosphere could produce was 48 inches. We got over 50 just right there in that location. So again, a challenging storm to figure out how to address these issues. Next slide. Okay, the last thing I wanted to touch on that was surprising to me and kind of everybody involved was that the new housing market responded very, very quickly. So these are monthly new home sales. You can see the dip right there with the orange arrow for August and November of 2017. We think that we lost probably about 10% of our new home sales that we would have expected, but those were all recovered within the next 3 to 4 months. So the Houston market tends to be very resilient after these kinds of disasters and generally snaps back. We do get some investment in flood recovery, but certainly, at least with Harvey, in terms of its impact on the real estate market, was not as significant as we feared it could. All right, and this is a little bit about my firm, and I think that'll be in the slides if Alex distributes those later.
I think we've got a really good overview of what happened. A lot of water in a lot of different spots, and I think, if I recall correctly, the rain had not stopped in our industry. The West Houston Association and many others started to mobilize to figure out what happens next. And I'd love to hear kind of from you, kind of what do we do after that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I will say that Lee alluded to the fact that we had been working on this issue for years. Actually, the West Houston Association came out with a report in 2007 that noted how the amount of funding that we were spending on flood control was actually decreasing after Tropical Storm Allison. If you go back to 2000, Harris County was spending 8 cents of every dollar that it collected on flood control. By Hurricane Harvey, that amount had dropped to about 2.8 cents of every dollar that it collected. So in spite of the fact that we'd seen, tax day floods and Memorial Day floods, we really hadn't had an adequate public response in terms of spending on infrastructure. And so that's kind of the backdrop for the West Houston Association's flood control committee activities during this time. We were working on our West Houston Association 2060 plan, which was an update of that 2007 report. And so Lee and BGE and the committee had already looked at all the different projects that were needed, at least in our area, to address flooding. And so we looked at a little broader approach, and Lee is a pretty global thinker. So a lot of the different treatments that he had come up with and the committee had come up with could be applied to the greater area. So, we got calls and wanted to respond. So we put together a few workshops. Obviously we were kind of expecting other organizations to take the lead in this. And so we probably did just have a couple of internal meetings, and then we figured, well, we're not really seeing some of the things we like from other places. So we just started calling those other places and said, how can we help you come up with a plan? And they said, well, what do y'all have? And so I told them a little bit about what we've been working on. And they said, well, that sounds great. When can we see it? So we said, give us a moment, but we'll get something together. So basically we pulled together with Greater Houston Builders Association, Greater Houston Partnership, ACEC, the North Houston Association, and about 10 other organizations on the front end, including like Houston Contractors Association, and even the National Association of Minority Contractors got together and really started showing the West Houston Association cards and saying, here are some of our ideas, here are our concepts. And, one of the things that we knew from the get-go is that we were going to need literally billions of dollars. And so we needed our congressional delegation to get something done, and we needed an amount of money. And so that was where, we called Joe B. Allen and we said, we're going to need some folks to go knock on doors in Washington. And that starts with pulling together a lot of our local folks here. So, Lee and the Flood Control Committee were working hard on the concepts. And we got folks like John Moody, who was the chair of the West Houston Association at the time, to get us in with, like Bob Harvey and the partnership, and then also Joe B. Allen. And we went and we talked to, everybody from, the Kinder Foundation to the Kinder Institute and everybody in between. And basically, the first thing we needed to do is make sure that we had a response that was somewhat, from the federal government, that was somewhat like what we saw after Katrina and Sandy. And we knew we weren't going to get it, but we needed to try hard. And so we worked very closely, especially with Culberson's office. And I got to give Culberson and his office a lot of credit for being able to pass the 2018 Bipartisan Budget Act. And in that act, there was over $89 billion for flood resiliency. And so, you have to remember that it wasn't just Hurricane Harvey. We had two other major hurricanes that hit Florida and Puerto Rico, within 90 days of each other. We also had wildfires in California. So by the end of, what was just a disastrous 2017, we had a lot of partners in DC on trying to come up with a disaster recovery bill. And so what we immediately understood is that once we got all of these dollars from the federal government, we would need local matches, because the way these federal programs work, the federal government will pay, if you're lucky, 90% of the bill. And if you're unlucky, 75% of the bill. And so one of the things that you have to figure out is which organization are you getting money from? Eventually, after we got the Bipartisan Budget Act, we ended up getting money from FEMA, HUD, and about 12 other federal agencies, from the Small Business Administration to the Ag Department. And so a lot of the challenge was for our local government partners was just figuring out which bucket of money to tap and then how they were going to provide that match. So we worked very closely with the city of Houston and the flood recoveries are, so Marvin Odom, and Marvin was, coming from Shell, very well versed in federal government, bureaucrat, did a great job of helping us connect to the right places. And so did Russ Poppy. I have to say, Russ Poppy has been going up to Washington for a long time and really knew the process. And so this was an opportunity for the public and private sector to really come together and talk about what we needed. And I think that's, like Lee mentioned earlier, that's one of the reasons that we had such an effective plan, was because we weren't really making this stuff up as we went. And there's one thing that is interesting about government work is that it is often produced by the private sector. the studies that we relied on came from the government, but the people who produced most of the data in those studies were actually at firms like Lee's and other firms. The engineering firms. You mentioned earlier how Lee's written all these different government standards and documents, and that's part of the way our government works. Is that this is not just a public action; it's underpinned by private brains and horsepower, and so that's one of the reasons that it was relatively easy for all of our sectors to kind of fit together, is because there was that understanding of how this information is produced and what we really needed from both the public sector and the private sector to make it work. And so one of the issues that we had is after Hurricane Harvey, we were hearing from our county officials, we're thinking we need, maybe $800 million or maybe $900 million. And so we knew from Lee that really our region was facing, or Harris County was facing, a $35 billion problem. And Lee's going to explain all of this going forward with some great graphics. But so we're sitting there and we're thinking, look, we need $35 billion just for Harris County. And we're not talking about the city of Houston. We're just talking about Harris County. So how can we realistically get that? So that's where we came.
So let me ask you a question. So at the time that the rain is still coming, the private industry talks to guys like BG, Lee Leonard, other members of the engineering community, and kind of says, we kind of know what we need to do. The water's still falling. And are you telling me in a short amount of time, we were able to kind of triage, all right, now we know how much money we need to go get, here are the projects, and then let's move forward? Because I mean, between 2017 and the bond issue of 2018, wasn't a whole lot of time. It was only 1 year. So can you talk just a little bit about that process? Because I know we're starting to do things now with big yellow machines. And I want to highlight that, our industry is doing a lot of what it's supposed to do. It just needs action.
Yeah, and it needed some time to figure out. So if you're trying to figure out how do you get $35 billion in investment, you need to figure out how much is going to come from the federal government. And so we kind of worked backwards into that. If to get that much, you're going to need a 10% local match. And so we thought that we could get about $2.5 billion from the county and then $1 billion from the state. And so that was part of the original Houston Stronger plan, was to get that $2.5 billion in. And that would make the federal government feel a lot more comfortable giving us the essentially, $31 billion that we would need from the federal side. And this isn't just going to come all at once. We understood that this would come through different buckets. And the biggest bucket is still yet to come. I mean, we have a lot of work left to do, and that's going to be in the Water Resource Development Act. But right now, the one thing that we could control was how do we get Harris County to address the funding. And so that's where, the West Houston Association had talked to our local county leaders and said, we think you need at least $2.5 billion, and here's why. And so we broke down that math, and, Lee had also done a great job of explaining like what projects you could potentially do in that. We also strongly encouraged the county to reach out to communities and stakeholders and really do their homework with local communities before they put that bond package together. And so that approach of, we're going to look at how much funding we can get right now to help prime the pump for the federal funding, worked into the number and the approach that we used whenever we approached the voters. So one of the reasons that we created Harris Plus Flood Solutions and Houston Stronger was we realized, the West Houston Association is relatively small. We needed to work with our partners, and we needed to create a forum to do that. And so thanks to Joby Allen and his firm, ABHR, we hosted lunches where we brought together all of these different firms and started working through our plan and our ideas. And so we we had over 50 organizations whose executive directors or chairs would attend our meetings and really talk through, what are the things that we can work on together? How can we make sure that we're all pulling the same direction with the environmental community, with, every different group that represents all the constituencies in our area? And so that approach, that, get literally everybody to the table approach, was critical whenever we were going out. And then we were approached by Judge Emmett to create the Fight Flooding PAC. And so at that point, he said, look, I've listened to y'all. Here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to have an election on the 1-year anniversary of Hurricane Harvey. I'd like it to be for $2.5 billion. And I'd like you all to go out and raise all the money to make it happen. So we went through a big fundraising effort. I got to work with some great political consultants, who, man, they know their stuff. The biggest complaint we had was from Commissioner Raddick that we didn't get enough yard signs. So we bought some more yard signs. And he did an amazing job of helping us get all those yard signs out. And we ended up having the most successful bond referendum in the history of Harris County.
What was the margin on that again?
So we were just short of 96%. So it was high. It was great.
And one thing I'd like to add is after the legislative session, you saw all the items in the Texas Constitution around setting up the flood funding. Those were passing in margins in counties 70-30 over and over and over. And I think that really highlights that people in Texas, and specifically our region, want to do something different. And I think that would really, I'd like to transition that to Lee. What are we doing different now? Because I know that that's something on the voters' minds. I know it's something on every mom and dad's mind as soon as June 1st rolls around, and especially with that coming up. So let me cue your slides up and you go forward.
Alex, while you're working on that, I would like to say that we did get that $1 billion from the state. We got bills passed that basically passed unanimously through the House and the Senate that create a state flood plan and flood infrastructure fund. So anyway, it was a great effort, and we're proud of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so Harvey changed everything for us, and I think in some ways, certainly in challenging ways, but with great potential in good ways. And between August of 17 and how this vote got overwhelmingly approved at the anniversary in August of 18 by 86% of the Harris County voters, is I think reflective of a number of parallel paths. And how did those plans get put together? The specifics. Well, that's hats off to the Harris County Flood Control District. West Houston had nothing to do with that. We just, again, what I love about what is going on in our community is there's so many disparate interests coming together and doing their part. And that's what leadership is all about. So I think leadership across the board has really stepped up. And that's been the difference in this response to this historic storm. So if you want to cue up the first slide, yeah, everything changed in Harvey. Our understanding of rainfall changed. You've got a picture there of the amount of rain that can be expect to fall in a 24-hour period in a 1% or 100-year chance event prior to our new understanding based on Atlas 14. So Atlas 14 was a NOAA initiative that was ongoing before Harvey, and NOAA has now changed our understanding and will increase the measures that we have to take to mitigate flood risks. So this shows technical paper 40, 1961, and the Harris County circled in red there can expect between a foot and a little over a foot of rain in a 24-hour period. Then go to the next slide. And this shows the Atlas 14 rainfall that now all of our hydrology, all of our flood risk maps are using and will be updated. Can you get that to flip to the next page, Alex? And so it's going from 12 to 13 inches to 17 to 18 inches of rain. So a 30% increase. So everything we're going to do going forward is going to be different. We're going to have 30% more volume, detention volume for mitigation. We're going to have to handle 30% more rain. And we're going to see an increase in green space and environmental opportunities on the order of a 30% increase. So some of this is going to be good. In light of COVID-19, so many of us are enjoying our parks and open spaces, and this is one aspect of what this does, is we have to allow more room for parks and open spaces going forward. Let's get to the plan now that Houston Stronger put together and show that slide. So here is this plan that incorporates what's shown, and let me just briefly go through this. A, B, and C. A has finished the job. Back in the 1930s, in response to a devastating flood in downtown Houston, the Corps of Engineers came up with a plan, and out of that plan, they constructed the Addicks and Barker reservoirs. The plan also included improvements to Buffalo Bayou and a third reservoir. What we're advocating is to finish the job. It may not look exactly like the Corps had planned back in the 40s, but it would include what's shown as A1, additional storage along the Cypress Creek watershed to further protect Addicks and Barker and the residents downstream. It would include a dashed red line called A4, and that would be what we're advocating as a tunnel, because Buffalo Bayou is an environmentally sensitive area. It's also a politically sensitive area. And what we see is the opportunity to construct a 40-foot diameter tunnel that would pick up water from Addicks and Barker and carry it through and under downtown Houston and release it at the Houston Ship Channel. And that would also have a water supply component that could potentially make a stop at the East Water Purification Plant, which would add more resiliency in times of drought for us as an alternate water source. The red highlighting that you see is to improve conveyance along all major streams in the county, including Clear Creek to the south. The good news for Brazoria County is that the Corps of Engineers has fully funded the 4 federal projects: Clear Creek, Brays Bayou, Hunting Bayou, and White Oak Bayou. So those projects are underway and moving forward, a real positive. And then the other aspect of this is strategic buyout, is to get people out of harm's way. That's a real challenge, though, because most buyouts are voluntary. And so what we're left with is a patchwork quilt, a checkerboard of neighborhoods where some have left and some have stayed. We need a more strategic response to get people out of harm's way. So that's the plan, the $35 billion plan. And as Augie mentioned, the components of that are local is $2.5 billion, state $1 billion, and federal is the remainder. Next slide. This shows all the plans for Harris and surrounding counties, totaling $57.97 billion, nearly $60 billion worth of work, including the coastal spine, the Ike Dike, if you will, including improvements and stabilization onto the Brazos River, including reservoirs in Montgomery County to help offset the flood risk along the San Jacinto River and into Kingwood and Lake Houston. So this is our guidepost, our map, if you will, to advocate for our plan forward. And as I said in my introductory remarks, we didn't get into this poor state of flood control overnight. It happened bit by bit as other priorities for the community took precedence. As Augie mentioned, with the reduction in tax rate from 8 cents per hundred down to less than 3 cents. But with this renewed focus and priority by the communities on resiliency and flood damage reduction, the current spend rate all in is north of $1 billion a year. You compare that to what was pre-Harvey of $60 million a year. If you spend $60 million a year on a $35 billion problem, you solve that problem over 500 years from now. We were never going to get there. What excites me is about the local leadership, the work that flood control is doing, the work the city of Houston is doing, the work that our federal partners are doing, the work that the state has done to really move the needle in new and wonderful ways. and all the opportunities that can hopefully come out of that. Next slide. The schematic that Houston Stronger has put together and flood control is studying. Well, that was the tunnel. The one that's in front of you now, this is our concept for what do we do in Western Harris County to never let private property be inundated from floodwaters. And our concept is to excavate the reservoirs, all on federal land, and then to lower the dams so that the catastrophic risk of flooding downstream is minimized. Next slide. And there you go. There's the flood tunnel concept that Harris County is studying and narrowing down options on. This is the one that Houston Stronger is advocating for, is a flood tunnel that would intercept flood waters from Attucks and Barker reservoirs and take them, convey them to the Houston Ship Channel near the East Water Purification Plant. So it would have dual use, flood protection and a water source as well. And then the last slide is about doing all of this with natural channel design, that is no concrete. This is an aerial photo of an example of this that exists out in Fort Bend County, Cross Creek Ranch, a subdivision that BGE, a development that BGE serves as engineer for. And we designed the civil engineering aspects of this concept. But these multi-use facilities with great benefits to the local residents, that's the way flood control is designing all these things. Any flood control facility for some time now has dual use. It holds water the days that it rains, but then for the 300 plus days a year that it's not raining, it's available for the citizens to enjoy the benefits of it recreationally, and it has the environmental benefits as well. So going forward, what do? I think we continue to advocate. If we don't continue to advocate, and I appreciate Alex hosting this meeting, then the conversation dies and the focus gets lost. I was encouraged that Congressman Dan Crenshaw, in a meeting a couple weeks ago, when asked, how do we make sure this stays on the front burner? He says, well, it stays on the front burner because I say it stays on the front burner. To paraphrase, it's an area of focus for him, and that's great. So we just need to keep the message going, keep the funding going, because what gets funded, what gets done. Without the funding, nothing gets done. I'll turn it back over to you, Alex.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's a great presentation. I'm really heartened to see that in 1,000 days time or 3 years, we have made progress. It's tangible. I think the funding detail you provide, Lee, which is we're now doing $1 billion a year versus $60 million a year. You could see in 20 or 30 years time that we're working towards that solution. Let me ask you a couple of questions, and then we'll open this up maybe to the audience. If they have anything in the chat, please put a question in there. What does Greater Houston in the maybe 2040 or 2050, what does that look like in your mind from a flood control perspective? We're talking about channels that are nature. We're talking flood tunnels. What does that look like? Because people are still coming here. And so I'm curious what you think we need to do. Some of those items you have are in Liberty County. Some of those are at Port Freeport in the south. Some of these solutions. What do you really think that will look like in terms of flooding and drainage in 2050 or 2040?
I think the opportunity is for a greater quality of life for all of the citizenry of this region, is to further provide a heightened level of resilience and risk abatement, and that's good. That's good for us. Think of the transportation network that was locked down if you happen to live on the west side of Houston and Harvey, and all the major arterials that cross Buffalo Bayou were shut off. It's not just the flooding in the homes, but it's I think it's the fabric, it's the backbone of our society. So I see a much stronger backbone being developed over the years to come. And that's a good thing for this region, competitively, to stay competitive globally as well. So, companies don't want to relocate to places where their employees are continually displaced with these jarring and life-threatening scenarios.
Yeah, I don't know, Lee, if you saw, but this morning, or was it yesterday, they had that failure of that dam in Midland, Michigan.
Right.
And my wife is from Michigan. I was born in Michigan. That is a gigantic advertisement saying, don't come here. We don't take care of the things we need to take care of. And I think for us as officials, people who know what is going on, or as citizens, we should be advocating for, this is keeping mom and dad safe, but this is also keeping our business and our economy safe.
It does keep development coming here. And that's, there is a flight to quality, especially as we're having these other issues. People are going to be looking at relocating and figuring out how are we, where do we want to move? And if we don't solve our flooding issues, we're never going to be top of the list. We'll be on the list, but we won't be top. And really, this is an environment where you have to be top in order to continue to draw business. We've seen, California's had some issues. Texas has opportunity. The only way we get it there is if we put all this funding actually into the ground. We have the funding, but we need to be able to get that translated into projects quickly and effectively.
We've got a question from Randy Jones here. What are the panelists' thoughts on Harris County's discussion about compelling new development regulations, as well as compelling new building standards, or miss out on partnership dollars through the flood control bond? How do you see it, and where do you think we need to go on that?
I'll go first. I think that's a solution to a problem that doesn't exist. It's been pretty clear that developments built to current standards haven't experienced the flooding and aren't really contributing to the flooding in the way that older developments are. And I don't see how you can, where the flooding is primarily, it's not even in areas where we are currently developing, maybe outside of the reservoir, which is really a Corps of Engineers solution. So what we really ought to be focused on is solutions that provide the maximum benefit. And that's a regional solution like the plan that Lee and Augie have talked about, that addresses conveyance, it addresses storage, it addresses reduction of risk of people who are located in high-risk areas. And none of those are really addressed by adding new development regulations. It's kind of an easy thing to propose, but it's not something that I think obviously would defer to Lee on his opinion of that, but to me, that sounds like that's not going to address what the issue is.
Yeah, from my perspective, I'll take a different tack on that. That I think what we're talking about, the nuance of that is where do they partner with neighbors? And so the one example is if Harris County is going to design a solution that addresses a 17-inch rain, and their financial partner says, no, I'm only going to pay for a 12-inch solution. I think Harris County has a valid point, and get on the same page towards the same solution with the higher standard, which is the new standard that we all have to abide by, which is the Atlas 14. So I think they're probably, maybe Scott's is more about that community-based response solution in view of a problem, versus my response, I think, is more narrow to the actual projects that are going to bring flood relief. Let's make sure we're on the same page, I think is what the county is saying, and that what we mitigate, let's agree what we're mitigating.
That's a good point.
It's just important to pull those adjacent counties in with you. And that's where I think some work needs to be done to make sure that this is a regional solution and not a county by county solution.
Sure. Well, I think that's a great question. Lastly, then we'll close up. If you're an average citizen or you're a business owner, and how do you, or where would you recommend people go and communicate on these issues, or where they have questions? I don't expect everybody to have the number one drainage H&H person close by, but how can they get more information to protect themselves or advocate for more dollars? What I think is that there's probably a regional bucket of projects, and then there's also stuff happening at your city level, your county level, and then rolling up. Where would you advocate for folks to go and learn more about that if they want to get more educated?
Yeah, for me, it's There's the Houston Stronger website, so you can go there and look at these overall plans. But the Harris County Flood Control website has a whole host of information and drills down into the specific neighborhood plans, what those plans are, all the details of when they expect them to start, when they expect them to end, how do you go about providing input. City of Houston, the Build Houston Forward website, same thing. Here's where they're working, here's what the plans are. So yes, I think a desktop search can get people information, inform them about what's going on in their area, and also will tell them how to weigh in and advocate for their issues. I know, for example, Harris County has a contingency fund of undedicated dollars that they're leaving open because they're suggesting, here's what we think the priorities are, but we've left room in our budget to hear other ideas and other priorities from concerned citizens. So there's an avenue for citizens, if they don't see something on the list, if you will, that's getting addressed specific to their need, there is a way for them to advocate for that to find its way onto the list.
To piggyback onto that, you also see, Dan Crenshaw, I think, actually had a discussion today with Russ Poppy. Lizzie Fletcher's done a number of town halls. A lot of our congressional delegation have done town halls on flood control, and it's really important for us to support those, attend those, and let our congressional delegation know that's a really important issue. We're about to go through the Water Resource Development Act legislative process where Congress is going to pick up billions of dollars and put it into projects. And if our congressional delegation doesn't fight hard for those dollars, they won't come here. So, that's where it's important for us to reach out to our congressional delegation and give them our thoughts on how important it is.
Absolutely. We've done a lot of block walking. We're getting involved down in Brazoria County, and I would tell you the number one issue consistently, we knocked 1,000 doors, is property taxes and drainage. Literally 1 and 2 every single time. And I think that's going to be something that elected officials, public servants, private sector folks, non-governmental folks, that's going to be the topic du jour for a long time. So I want to just give you guys the last chance to just leave any parting thoughts, and then we'll close this up. So I'll go ahead and start with Scott, and we'll work our way down.
Great. Thanks, Alex. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to you and the panelists and everybody today. I know right now our focus is elsewhere with kind of another natural disaster going on with the coronavirus, but we do have that hurricane season coming up. And I remember when I first moved into the Brace Heights area near Meyerland, I found an older woman who lived in the area, and I said, "Hey, has it ever flooded here?" She said, "It's never flooded here the whole time I've lived here." It turns out she had lived there 9 months, and 2 weeks later, we flooded. So you never know when it's going to be you. You can't rely on the wisdom of an elderly neighbor or the fact, well, it's never flooded here. It can happen anywhere every year. 25% of houses that flood are outside the floodplain. In Harvey, the majority that flooded were outside the floodplains. Some of that will change with the new maps, but there are steps you can take to protect yourself and your family, and I'd encourage everybody to think about doing so as we come up on the season.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks for that advice, Scott. Augie, what about you?
Yeah, I want to piggyback on something that Lee said earlier about how this is not just flood control. It's for 365 days of the year. We need to think about how we've reacted during this pandemic. Being able to get out into green spaces is critical for mental health. It's also going to be extremely important for economic resilience. If we do these right, they're great community amenities that businesses and families will come to. And so it's not just about resilience from floods, it's about resilience from economic downturns and resilience even, and as Lee's pointed out, if we do this right, it's also an opportunity when we have droughts and other things to make sure that our region is really prepared. And I think that's, if our solutions really think through all the different scenarios, then we're all going to be better off. And so I think we got to continue to work on making this Houston Stronger plan better.
those are strong words, and I echo them 100%. So, Lee, what do you have? You're closing us up. So,
Yeah, well, I want us all to remain glass half full people. And, this is Texas, by golly. This is Houston. And what a great can do spirit. So we're in the fog in the difficult time of COVID, but the future will always be better when leadership rises to embrace the opportunities that the future holds. And let's make it better for our children and our children's children, and something we can be proud of, to leave a legacy of a community that's better than when we found it.
110%. I'd like to just say thank you for everybody for making time. Thank you for our panelists. And I want to just let everybody know we are going through a tough time, but Texans and Americans are tough people, and we're going to get through this. And I want to let you know that I hope you guys are all safe and your families are safe, and that we all get back to work really soon. So thank you guys. You guys have a great day. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Alex.
Alex.
We're going to go to in about an hour. So I'm out.